Well, I'm
And so,
mindful of the time, so I want to move on beyond the group selectionism thing. Let's talk briefly about religion. Of course, you've written the book Darwin's Cathedral, where you invoke group selectionism to explain the adaptive value of religiosity. So my question to you would be the following, and actually I said yesterday in my MBA class that I would ask you this question because I was talking about cultural products of which religion is one manifestation. Do you think that if an idea confers a benefit to an individual or to a group. So in your argument, it confers, adaptive value to the group. But I could say that being religious allows me to deal with issues that otherwise would have been impossible for me to deal with had I not been religious. So think about sort of the Pascal's wager type of argument. As a purist, so let me first show my cards. As a purist, I would argue that if I think that an idea is false, but confers benefits, as a purist, I don't accept it. What's your position on this? If I can prove to you, so I don't know what your religious views are, but if I say to you, religion is a false belief system that nonetheless confers benefits to individuals or groups, is it worthwhile to keep it, or as a seeker of truth, I should reject it?
right. Okay. So here's, we can get through this. We're good here. How much do we have? Only 9 more minutes for our
No,
conversation.
no, you said till 11:45 you have to stop, so you have about 20 minutes.
Okay, good, good. So this is such a deep topic. And let's begin with the concept of symbolic thought, something which is actually turning out to be very distinctively human, maybe even uniquely human. Why? Because it's a form of intense cooperation. And the one thing that distinguishes our species from, certainly from chimps, our closest ancestors, and from actually most other primate species, even most other social species, it's a shock for many people who are not biologists to realize how many social species are just like horrible and despotic from a human perspective. There's a little bit of cooperation, and there's a lot of antagonism among members of single groups as they strive for dominance and so on and so forth. They kill each other's babies.
Lions.
They impose suffering on each other. All forms of within-group selection, disruptive within-group selection. And there's also a degree of cooperation that evolves by between-group selection. It's like a mixed bag. But in humans, what took place was what's called a major evolutionary transitions, mechanisms that enabled members of groups to suppress each other's self-serving tendencies, mostly through punishment. And Richard Wrangham's most recent book, The Goodness Paradox, is all about the self-domestication, basically. And that enabled all forms of cooperation to take place, not just physical cooperation, but mental cooperation. And so there was a renaissance, an inflorescence of the capacity to communicate in terms of symbols. And so what that means is just as we have a collection of, every individual has a collection of genes, which in part determines the way they are. That's a genotype-phenotype relationship. Every human has a collection of symbols that in part determines who they are. Let's call that a symbotype-phenotype relationship. And so that's what dual inheritance theory is. Two streams of inheritance, a symbolic stream and a genetic stream. The symbolic stream arose by genetic evolution, but then it became an evolutionary, an inheritance system in its own right. And then those two streams of inheritance have been co-evolving with each other for our entire history of a species. And it's very often the case that the slow process of genetic evolution follows where the fast process of cultural evolution leads. So first we adapt to our environments culturally by individual learning and cultural transmission, and then that reconfigures the genetic selection pressures so that genetic evolution more or less adapts us to the environments that we construct for ourselves.
That's the lactose
Culturally.
intolerant argument
And
with
the
Pascal.
lactose intolerance is
Yeah,
the perfect
yeah.
example of that. First, we domesticate livestock, and then we genetically develop the ability to digest lactose. And there's many, many examples of that. So against that background, all of us have meaning systems, symbolic systems, or we can't function without them, which might or might not count as religious or not. You might or might not be religious, but you certainly do have some collection of symbols in your head that organize your experience and ultimately figure out how you act. Okay, now, if we look at any meaning system and think of religion as a subset of meaning systems, that's an extremely important move. We should not be studying religions. We should be studying meaning systems and then various types of meaning systems. And then we look at beliefs within a meaning system that count as factually correct, scientifically accurate, or not. And then we ask the question, what is the role of fictions, adaptive fictions, in meaning systems? Why is it that we believe in stuff that's not out there? Is it just some kind of stupid quirk? Or is there a sense in which, at least historically, most meaning systems, in order to organize our experience and motivate actions, made abundant use of stuff that's not out there? Things that are within the meaning system, they don't correspond to what's out there, but their connection to reality is how they cause us to behave in the real world. And then you can see that at least in the past, leading up to the present, all meaning systems, regardless of whether they appear to us as religious or not, are chock full of adaptive fictions. All kinds of departures from it. They must, in some sense, in order to function.
If I could, sorry to interrupt you. Forgive me for interrupting you, just so I can kind of direct the conversation a bit. I mean, your eloquent response was a response to my original question, which is, does it make sense to believe in something if it has some functional benefit or adaptive benefit, even though I think it's false? And your response to me, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you'll correct me, it's almost a new variant of the accommodationist perspective of someone like Stephen Jay Gould, whereby, I mean, in his case, he's saying, hey, NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria, science and religion can get along. And you're somehow being a bit of an apologist for, hey, there is value in religion, whether we think it's true or not. But again, my mother once told me when I was about, I don't remember how old, maybe 8 or 9 years old, she looked at me and she said, Gad, the world doesn't abide by your purity bubble. The world is made up of it, right? So stop being so pure. It won't do you well in life. Regrettably, I didn't listen to her good advice. And I've gone on my life living with a very sort of principled, exacting principle of purity. So to me, if I think that a belief system is false, I outgrow it, irrespective of whether in some past or some present it confers to me some functional benefit. It is false. Therefore, as a truth seeker, I reject it. Do you think that I'm being too dogmatic in my approach? Do you think that if religion has some value, then we should, play the game even though it may be false? And it's a simple question.
Well, I want to stake out our common ground
Yeah.
first, our zone of agreement first. The meaning system that both of us want to work towards, the meaning system most worth wanting, needs to be fully respectful of factual reality, basically a science-based meaning system. Now, science by itself only tells us what is, not how to act. So science needs to be supplemented with values in order to become a meaning system. To think otherwise is the famous naturalistic fallacy. So yes, I think that we need to work towards a meaning system which is in the first place highly motivating, gets us out of bed brimming with purpose, and then instructs us how to act for the benefit of the whole world. And in order to do that is going to be very much based on science. And so that's the meaning system of the future that we want to work towards. when we examine the meaning systems of the present and the past, we need to realize that they are not like that for some very good reasons. And furthermore, we have to realize that if you think that religions are the only meaning systems that depart from factual reality, I have something to tell you.
Right, sure.
And there's an amazing book that illustrates this called The Invention of Tradition. And what it shows is that what people believe about their own people and their own past is just as important as any gods that they might.
Well, all you're saying is that people could be parasitized, as I explained in my forthcoming book, by many different strains of idea pathogens. One of which, though, is religion.
One of which is religion, but one reason why I am somewhat of a fierce critic of the so-called new atheists,
right,
is that they depart from factual reality in their own way in their beliefs about religion.
How so?
They cannot, and just look at, for example, the conversation that Richard Dawkins had with Brett Weinstein that is available on the internet. And Weinstein, who might disagree with me on group selection, we don't really know because we haven't had that conversation, tried to get Dawkins to acknowledge the fact that most enduring religions are cultural adaptations. They exist on this earth because they create strong cooperative communities. But Dawkins could not bring himself to say that. For Dawkins, the only way that he can understand religions is as some kind of mind virus, mind parasite, bad for individuals, bad for groups, like a parasite. That's a theoretical possibility, but it ain't true. And there's plenty of scholarship during the last 20 years following upon Darwin's Cathedral and the other books that started to appear to that. There's the consensus among people that study religions from an evolutionary perspective that most enduring religions are group-level adaptations, which is basically the thesis of Darwin's Cathedral. Dawkins just can't go there. He can't go there. And so that makes him basically blind to the very nature of religion. He has to think of it as evil. And so there's an example of false beliefs, basically, about what we know about religion.
But see, I see it more. I mean, it's an accounting system. So in the ledger, I put the pros and the cons. I would readily concede that there are many benefits, as I stated earlier, for being religious, both at the individual level and in sort of the adaptive position that you take. And so, to be different from Richard Dawkins, I concede that that's true. But I also would proclaim that his analysis of it being a mind virus, I mean, there is an endless number of things that religion brings about that are terrible. I can't remember the exact quote by the physicist, the Nobel Prize physicist, who said, only religion can make good people do bad things, or I don't remember the exact quote. As someone who left the Middle East under imminent threat of execution, I wasn't running away from MAGA-wearing Trump supporters. I was running away from people who were very committed religiously to exterminate people who came from my religion. And at that point, I couldn't hide under the protective shield of Darwin's Cathedral and group selectionism of adaptive arguments, right? I was running for my life because religion does parasitize human minds. So again, I think that Dawkins is wrong not to recognize the point that you're making, but it is also incorrect to proclaim that, it is one of one meaning systems and there are other false beliefs. Religion is something that I'd like to think we can outgrow. Although, by the way, I don't think we'll ever outgrow it, because I think that it is part of human nature to be religious, precisely because we have the prefrontal cortex to recognize our mortality, to recognize that horrible things can happen to us randomly, and the only pill that we can take to, quote, solve that problem is to be religious. So while I am staunchly anti-religious, I recognize that we will never eradicate it. So what does that make me? Does that make me a new atheist, or does that make me a regular vanilla atheist?
I think that what you're attributing to religion has to be attributed to multi-level selection. What multi-level selection tells us is that competition at any level, such as the between group level, is disruptive. Within group cooperation and between group competition are joined at the hip. And Peter Turchin's book, Ultra Society, explains this well. So, I mean, in the animal world, there's all kinds of destructive competition among groups, such as social insect colonies fighting each other. So we have not only the destructive effects of between-group competition, but the within-group destructive effects of what Michelle Gelfand calls tight cultures in her book on tight and loose cultures. Any tight culture, which is basically organized, designed to create solidarity within the group, is going to be imposing harsh sanctions on its own members, brutal, harsh sanctions on its own members in order to forge them into a solid unit in competition with other groups. There's so many examples of that taking place outside of religion that what we're attributing to religion, we should be attributing to this process of multi-level selection. And knowing that, it's against that background, by the way, that if you look at the emergence of the major religious traditions, such as Christianity and Buddhism, I just had a conversation with the Dalai Lama a couple of weeks ago. In preparation for that, I read the history of Tibet. One of incessant between-group conflict at various scales. It could be the small scale of clans warring with other clans, or it could be at the large scale of the Chinese Empire warring with other empires. You're never getting away from between-group conflict. All you're doing is monkeying with the scale. And what the advent of the major religions did, such as Buddhism and Christianity, was they increased the scale of between-group competition. They provided a glue for cooperative society to hang together at a much larger scale than before. That was the good news, but always in competition with some other group. And so you're never eliminating conflict. You're only elevating it to a larger scale where it can take place with even more destructive force than before. That's the big picture.
So then
to attribute that to religion is profoundly untrue.
So then you would support the position of Scott Atran, where he says that people join ISIS not at all for any religious-based beliefs, but rather it's for male bonding and sensation-seeking. You're into that model?
Well, what Atran says, God, is a sense of meaning.
Right.
Not male bonding, not sensation-seeking, a deep sense of meaning. That's why a suburban kid who just doesn't know, in a materialistic culture, could actually do something like that because it gives them some sense of a deep purpose in life. So there is that
deep purpose is being invoked by religion in this case, right? It's not
in this case it is. Right. In this case it is. And what Atran says is let's find ways to create groups with a deep purpose in life that are more pro-social.